Nozarashi is undoubtedly one of Kenpachi's greatest assets within battle. Long-term fans of the series will know that this wasn't always the case, because for a massive portion of the story, Nozarashi was nothing more than a battered, weathered blade that Kenpachi had used to carve up his opponents. Everything had changed for Kenpachi once he had overcome his subconscious limitations and he had fully embraced the upper limits of his power. It is only at that point that the cries of Nozarashi can be heard by Kenpachi, thus allowing him to tap into an insane amount of power which otherwise he wouldn't have been able to utilize. Nozarashi is a very powerful but yet mysterious Zanpakuto. This is considering the fact that we've seen it being utilized in battle within its sealed state several times, and we have also seen its Shikai and Bankai forms too. Understandably, fans have a lot of questions about this Zanpakuto, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll understand some of the answers to these questions, like where does the Bankai of Nozarashi originate from? Does this Zanpakuto have any ties to hollows or even the realm of hell? Can Nozarashi even be considered as a Zanpakuto due to the very unique circumstances of its activation? And lastly, what kind of abilities does Nozarashi possess? In this video, I'm going to do my utmost best to provide you with answers to some of these pressing questions, because Kubo has left multiple clues within the story which can be interpreted in several interesting ways, which will allow us to better understand Kenpachi Zanpakuto. So join me as I break down and dissect everything that there is to know about Nozarashi. In order to fully understand Nozarashi and its immense power, I'm going to be discussing every single phase of this Zanpakuto's release and all of the details that we can deduce from them. So naturally, this involves talking about the sealed state of Nozarashi as well as the subsequent Shikai and Bankai release states which are revealed during the 1000-year Blood War arc. So let's start by dissecting Nozarashi's sealed state and all of the feats that it has displayed within the story thus far. This idea of Kenpachi being so ridiculously powerful that it was assumed that a Zanpakuto was in a constantly released state is actually pretty funny. This also reveals some very important details about the power dynamics of shinigami, suggesting that the strength of a shinigami is intrinsically tied to their Zanpakuto. If this was the case, then the assumption of Nozarashi being in a constantly released state wouldn't really exist. In actuality, a shinigami's power is enhanced by their Zanpakuto. I say all of this in order to emphasize that without a Zanpakuto, a shinigami's true potential will always remain untapped, thus illustrating the deep symbiotic relationship between these two core elements. This is best demonstrated via our protagonist Ichigo Kurosaki. Pretty much every single power-up, transformation, or instance of growth that he manifests within the story is as a result of him evolving alongside his Zanpakuto Zangetsu. When Ichigo first attains Shikai, that's when he becomes strong enough to fight and defeat lieutenant tier threats. When he unlocks Bankai, he awakens power that allows him to keep up with captain tier opponents. When Ichigo masters control over his holification, this is yet another aspect of his Zanpakuto's power which enables him to be able to fight and even defeat some of the Espada. Now this continuous progression of Ichigo's power increasing as he builds a deeper connection with his Zanpakuto, proving that this link between a shinigami's power and the evolution of a Zanpakuto has been present since the very beginning of the story, and it's been a very consistent theme throughout all of Bleach. This isn't even exclusive to Ichigo, as almost every other shinigami within the story has undergone a similar progression of power which is intrinsically tied to their Zanpakuto's evolution. So we can deduce that it's impossible for a shinigami to become more powerful without their Zanpakuto also evolving. So where does Kenpachi and his Zanpakuto Nozarashi fit into all of this? During the Soul Society arc, we very quickly learn that there is no synergy between Kenpachi and his Zanpakuto. At this point in the story, he doesn't even know the name of his Zanpakuto, which is an incredibly shocking fact considering that Kenpachi is a captain tier shinigami. His Zanpakuto Nozarashi is about as useful to Kenpachi as any other random sword just lying down the ground. He cares very little for how he treats his Zanpakuto in battle, thus explaining why his blade looks so weathered and damaged. This is a very interesting point as it confirms Uetsu Nimaya's statement regarding how Zanpakuto who receive less love from their owners are more susceptible to damage and are more brittle and easier to break in comparison to Zanpakuto that are loved by their owners. Based on everything that we have spoken about thus far, how was Kenpachi able to tap into so much strength and power when his relationship with his blade was virtually non-existent? As fans, we have always known about Kenpachi's subconscious restrictions that he has placed upon his own power, but for some reason we don't really link this power restriction to his Zanpakuto Nozarashi itself. Kenpachi limiting his own power had a direct effect on his Zanpakuto. The difference between the strength that we perceive from Kenpachi and his actual power is highlighted during his battle against Unohana. She reveals that Kenpachi's performance against most opponents was limited because he was in fact holding back against them. While all of the things that he has done within the story seem impressive, they barely scratch the surface of what Kenpachi is actually capable of doing once he forms and develops a relationship with his Zanpakuto Nozarashi. Even as a child, Kenpachi was even more powerful than Unohana, the first generation captain of the 11th division. This is somebody who was dubbed as the most diabolical criminal in the history of the Soul Society. Despite her immense power and all of the incredible titles that she held, she was still no match for a young Kenpachi. An important detail to note is that by the time that the young Kenpachi had his initial battle against Unohana, his Zanpakuto Nozarashi had already assumed its form that it takes on today, indicating that Kenpachi's soul had fully imprinted onto the Zanpakuto that he had stolen, thus making Nozarashi pretty much a fully fledged Zanpakuto even at that early point in the story. Now the reason that I'm bringing this up is to support the idea that Kenpachi's shinigami powers had fully developed at this time. This is regardless of him being aware of Nozarashi or not, because at this point it was already an extension of his own soul and an embodiment of his power. So we can establish that Kenpachi's power was intrinsically linked to Nozarashi during his initial battle against Unohana. Now Kenpachi had started to distance himself from his own power by rejecting Nozarashi. This explains why he was unable to draw out the power from his Zanpakuto, and as we see during the Soul Society arc, he had become so distant from his own blade that he was unable to hear its cries. It was like a veil was placed over Kenpachi, thus blocking him from hearing the name of his Zanpakuto. So when we speak about these subconscious restrictions that Kenpachi had placed upon his power, it wasn't that he was rejecting his own innate strength, but instead it was his inability to tap into Nozarashi's power, which meant that he was unable to attain Shikai or even Bankai, and he struggled to utilize Nozarashi at full power within its sealed state. It was important for Kenpachi to remove all of his subconscious limitations before he was able to access the full power of his Zanpakuto. When Kenpachi was limiting his power and subconsciously rejecting Nozarashi, he had reduced himself to only being able to use the smallest percentage of his Zanpakuto's base power. This situation is a direct inversion of Ichigo's, who was in fact being limited by Old Man Zangetsu, who was allowing him to tap into only a fraction of his power, in contrast to Kenpachi, who was responsible for imposing restrictions on his own Zanpakuto's power. When you talk about Nozarashi, it's difficult to say what exactly its current power level is. On one hand, its power is still at its baseline because Kenpachi had only just accessed the true power of Nozarashi during the 1000-Year Blood War arc. On the other hand, based on the feats that Kenpachi had demonstrated during the final arc, it would be plausible to assume that in its sealed state, Nozarashi is already at the height of its power. But what about Kenpachi's newly awakened Shikai form? This is a form that he had unlocked after finally being able to hear the name of his blade. This now takes us to our next area of discussion, which is the Shikai transformation of Nozarashi. It is slightly disappointing that the only time that we see this power utilized is when Kenpachi is still wearing his eye patch, which we know restricts his power massively. Despite this, what do we know about Kenpachi Zaraki's Shikai? Well, from its first appearance in chapter 577, we are able to deduce that the released state of Nozarashi enhances the blade by transforming into even more of a destructive weapon, as we see during Kenpachi's battle against Gremi. Kenpachi being able to single-handedly deal with a giant meteor with only a swing of his Shikai is not only one of his greatest physical showings of power, but it's one of the most powerful feats that we have seen demonstrated within the Bleach universe. The meteor isn't just sliced in half by the Shikai of Nozarashi, it instead is completely obliterated into nothing. Now this implies one of two things. Either Nozarashi's sheer power was enough to utterly destroy the meteor, or on the other hand, it was as a result of a unique special ability that is activated within Nozarashi's Shikai state. I'm more inclined to believe that Kenpachi just has an ability to cut through anything, as this is more in line with one of his signature catchphrases when he repeatedly yells at his opponents that there is literally nothing that he cannot cut, considering the fact that during this fight we also see him cut through space and time itself. Him being able to cut through and obliterate a meteor is a pretty believable feat, which doesn't rely on him activating a hacks or broken ability within his Shikai. So this now brings us to the next time that we see Nozarashi unleashed within the story, which is during Kenpachi's battle against the Sternritter Gerard Valkyrie. Kenpachi is seen to be struggling against Gerard, not just because of the Sternritter being more powerful, but also because of the fact that he possesses an incredibly inconvenient ability, which in fact was the perfect counter to Kenpachi's fighting style. In this situation, we could easily explain it off as Kenpachi just fighting someone above his pay grade, so even if he were to push his strength to its utmost limits, it might still fall short against the colossal might of Gerard. Despite Kenpachi being extremely powerful, it still leaves room for him to grow as a character. Let's now turn our attention towards another aspect of Nozarashi's power, which is its Bankai Transformation, which honestly caught a lot of us by surprise because it was revealed so soon after the Shikai release of Nozarashi. Nozarashi's Bankai is even more mysterious than its Shikai. This power-up not only transforms Nozarashi's blade, but it fascinatingly also alters Kenpachi's physical appearance. He transforms into a demonic figure resembling an Oni, as he is unable to differentiate between friend or foe. When you compare the Bankai of Nozarashi to other Bankai which alter physical appearances of their users, they end up being Bankai forms which typically enhance the abilities that are seen within the user's Shikai. Consider the Bankai of Hakano Togame, which intensifies the lethality of Sorino Shirayuki's code manipulation, or how So-O Zabimaru extends the versatility and power of Zabimaru's Shikai. And as we know, Tensei Zangetsu enhances all of Ichigo's physical capabilities that he demonstrates within his Shikai form. With all of this in mind, it's more than enough evidence to assume that any Bankai that alters a character's physical appearance doesn't differ too greatly from the core abilities of that user's Shikai. So on this basis, we can deduce that if Kenpachi's Shikai has any special abilities, it would make sense that his Bankai would also possess similar abilities. The Bankai of Nozarashi is first revealed within chapter 669 of the manga, during Kenpachi's battle against Gerard. After Kenpachi's brutal defeat by Gerard, he sees a manifestation of Nozarashi's Bankai avatar, which appears strikingly like Yachuru. Kubo explains why Yachuru had appeared in front of Kenpachi during this moment on his official fan club Club Outside, and I've also made a separate video on the channel explaining this too. In summary, in the same way that Tensei Zangetsu is a younger version of Old Man Zangetsu, Kenpachi's lieutenant Yachuru Kusajishi as we know her is actually the appearance of Nozarashi in its Bankai form, and contrastingly the real manifestation of Nozarashi takes on the form of an adult woman. Fans had used this information in order to explain the reasoning behind why Kenpachi was able to activate Bankai so soon after learning the name of his Zanpakuto, theorizing that because he had such a tight bond with his lieutenant Yachuru, he thus had formed a connection with his Zanpakuto, making it easier for him to then activate his Bankai after he had awakened his true power. In chapter 669, Yachuru explains that she had granted Kenpachi the power of Bankai. How this Bankai is even activated is a complete outlier when compared to how other Bankai are activated. Most Bankai involve some means of gaining the respect of the Zanpakuto in question. Yoruichi explains during Ichigo and Renji's Bankai training that a Zanpakuto spirit must be in complete submission to its wielder in order for a Bankai to be activated. After attending Bankai, usually a shinigami yells out Bankai, with the Zanpakuto responding and thus manifesting the second release of the Zanpakuto, but in Kenpachi's case, it's Yachuru who says Bankai and he transforms immediately afterwards into this demonic creature. So here it's the Zanpakuto that releases the Bankai for the user. Now because we have never really seen the first Bankai activation of anybody within the series, this may just be what happens when a shinigami activates their Bankai for the first time. So after Yachuru says Bankai, there is a massive eruption of spiritual pressure that dissipates and reveals Kenpachi in his Bankai state. His new physical appearance is accompanied by an altered state of mind where he is essentially a berserker. This may just be his default state within his Bankai, or this lack of awareness may be as a result of him being inexperienced with this new power. As we know, it takes 10 years to master a Bankai, and if this is the first time that he is using it, then it's understandable as to why he has absolutely no no control over his Bankai form. The only other instance that I can compare this to is Ichigo's holification. The first time that we had seen Ichigo holify, he had gone into a similar Berserker-like state against Byakuya during the end of the Soul Society arc, but this had all changed once Ichigo had learned how to control his holification. It will be interesting to see if Kenpachi activates his Bankai in the upcoming Hell arc of the manga, which is set 12 years after the 1000-year Blood War arc, which is plenty of time for Kenpachi to come to grips with his Bankai and to master it to some degree. In this Bankai form, he is able to catch Gerard's descending punch with his teeth as he effortlessly rips his entire arm off, as he then spits the gigantic arm far away from them. He once again wields his sword, which he uses to effortlessly slice through Gerard's shield and his arm. He also casually picks Gerard off of his feet with one arm and sends him flying off of the edge of Waterworld. So again, not only has his cutting power improved significantly, but his physical strength has also skyrocketed. I think that the Bankai of Nozarashi removes the focus of all of the destructive power being concentrated in the Zanpakuto, as this power is now shared across to Kenpachi's body. So in other words, everything that his blade can do, his body can also pull off too. Again, Kenpachi's Bankai is gonna remain a mystery until we get more information revealed during the upcoming Hell arc of the manga. But with the anime expanding upon a lot of material from the 1000-year Blood War arc, I really do hope that the spotlight is shined onto Kenpachi's powers, and the anime does a bit more of a better job at explaining how Nozarashi works and what exactly are the powers of Kenpachi's Shikai and his Bankai. There is every opportunity for Kenpachi to showcase his Shikai once again in the story via an anime exclusive fight scene that we didn't see within the manga, as well as an extended fight sequence where he utilizes his Bankai against Gerard, because a lot of that portion of the story is rushed within the manga. So I can guarantee that this isn't the last that we have seen of Nozarashi, and I know that Kubo is sitting on quite a bit of information in regards to Kenpachi's power, which we all can definitely look forward to in the upcoming 3rd and 4th core of the 1000-year Blood War arc anime. Now, we've reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What do you guys think about the incredible Zanpakuto Nozarashi? I've tried my best to break down and analyze all of the different phases of this blade, from its sealed state to its Shikai and its Bankai. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention, then definitely let me know in the comments. I look forward to reading all of your thoughts about this incredibly powerful Zanpakuto. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.